Welcome to the ADNA Presents. This is Roy Samuelson. Today we have a repeat guest coming back, Juan Alcazar. He is a content creator, and I'm so excited for this conversation as always. Thanks for joining us, Juan. Let's talk about how things have changed in audio description recently for you.
Quite a few things have changed, actually. I believe when I first was on here, I was talking about things like older films being audio described and, a few things like that. And I've kind of noticed that the number of older films has slowly increased that have audio description. And I've purposely gone out of my way to check some of these out. Some of these just for nostalgia, some of these I've never checked out before. And, I just think it's really interesting to hear a lot of these older films being described. But as for just, in general, I'm exploring more new films as well with audio description, and I'm really appreciating the art more and more, especially now that I guess I would say that I have a foot in the audio description world in the creation process, in a way.
So, as far as new films go, I'm imagining that your contribution to audio description has a lot to do with you as a content creator, that some of those skills that you already have do contribute to the art of audio description. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
What I was referring to in the whole creation process of it is that I'm actually doing QC for a company that does audio description, actually. And it's pretty interesting, to be honest, because it kind of does touch on a lot of the stuff that I've done with just content creation. And I'll be more specific with what I mean about that. I'm assuming a lot of folks who are listening to this know what quality control for audio description is, but it's real interesting because for me, it kind of touches on a lot of that stuff that I learned when I was taking film courses, when I was learning how to make film and video. When you're told to actually become self-conscious of the elements that are part of the movie. And sometimes it's annoying, sometimes it's nice. It's annoying when you're trying to actually watch the movie, but at the same time, I've noticed that a similar thing happens when you're doing QC for audio description because you kind of have to get, lost in the content itself to just recognize the context of what's happening on screen. But at the same time, as soon as I go through a second pass of that same line or cue, I have to disconnect myself and be like, okay, now technically, is everything fine here? So it's almost like a constant like tuning in and tuning out.
The film courses that you've had and getting lost in the content on that first pass and then a second pass on the technical side. What I'm hearing is that there's a lot of decisions that go into it. And I'd imagine a lot of our audiences listening to this podcast assume, oh, quality control is just listening and making sure there's no mistakes. And it's like, clearly, you put a lot more into your QC. Let's back up just a little bit. Maybe you had some assumptions about what QC was as a content creator, and then now that you're doing it, maybe some things are exactly as you expected, or maybe some things are a lot different than what you expected. Could we start with maybe those assumptions that you had?
My initial thoughts of QC were kind of like what you said. It was just someone like making sure that everything sounds right, blah, blah, blah. All the T's are crossed, I's are dotted, things like that. I mean, in a way it is, but at the same time, it's more than that. And like I said, you have to know context wise. Does a line of dialogue fit? If you have a suggestion for, does this need to be rewritten in a certain way? And sometimes I have to double check myself because I might have a suggestion, but then I realize the writer only had like 2 or 3 seconds worth of time. So what I had in mind isn't going to fit in that time frame. So, that's why the writer
Mhm.
does the writing and I don't.
Well, what about your own experience? I'm thinking about the first time that you were given a QC assignment, and then by the time you turned in that first assignment, did you have any changes yourself in your own process based on what you thought it would be versus what it actually was?
I knew it was going to be a quick turnaround time because, I mean, in this industry, the whole time is money thing is extremely true. Even though I knew it, just getting my feet wet with that, it really put things into perspective for me. So just realizing that, like, tight deadlines are just, way of life with this. It was kind of just trying to manage a way of being able to do the work without feeling like I was getting burnt out or anything like that. It's one of those things that even though you might mentally prepare yourself, once you get your feet wet, it's like, okay, I knew what to expect, but it still feels kind of different because it still took me by surprise a bit.
I'm thinking about other people's assumptions about quality control. And you and I have talked for years offline and in a few panels ourselves together about audio description and that your perspective obviously means a lot, enough for someone to pay you for your skills and talent here. What do you think other people, and we kind of addressed this earlier, so maybe a little different approach here. When it comes to audio description quality control, what's something that you wish audio description audiences knew about quality control that maybe they don't?
Audio description is basically one of the next to last things that happens in the post-production process. And QC is one of the next to last things that happens in the AD process. So in a way, you're kind of giving that last check before things are approved. It might be different from place to place, but definitely QC is one of those very last steps. It's a very tight deadline, like I said, and it really depends on the time frame that we're given to finish these projects. Sometimes we might be given a little bit more time. Sometimes it might just be like, okay, you have a day or two to finish it.
I'm thinking about the expectations that your company has on you who understand this short turnaround, this tight deadline, that there's got to be a lot of grace that you as a QC are given in the sense of, hey, I if I had 3 weeks, the QC would be a lot different than the 2 hours or whatever. There's got to be some managing of those expectations. Do you find that, being, as you said, the last line of defense, being audio description being one of the last things to happen in quality control in audio description in the work that you've been doing has been the last of that last step. So is there any pressure there, or do you feel like your skills are being respected in a way that, hey, we get it. Sorry, Juan, we don't have enough time. Do the best you can, and that's what we have.
As me and you have talked in the past, especially with my content that I post on my YouTube and even TikTok, I'm a very picky person. I can go through things with a fine-tooth comb a lot of times.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm very detail oriented, and the problem is that, sometimes being detail oriented and you have a tight deadline, those two things don't generally mix. But I try to do the best I can. I know there's a few things that are not under my control, but what is, then I try to do the best to be like, hey, this works, this doesn't. At the end of the day, I do have to get things done in a certain amount of time.
Let's flip the quality control expectations a little bit. I'm thinking about a specific project where you give specific notes. Do you find that after you've given that specific note, maybe it addresses a systemic change that could actually help the voice talent or the writer of the audio description? Let's say the writer in this case, that maybe there's a specific note within a specific content that you give a note and the writer gets that feedback and says, "Oh yeah, I do that. Maybe I could change my ways and I could do things a little bit differently." And then maybe the next time you get a very specific project, that very problem has been addressed. Have you experienced anything like that?
I have, and this is kind of one of those areas where I feel caught in between because, the writer's the writer and I'm just doing the QC. But if I do have a suggestion for making a change in the line, sometimes I do mention it, but at the same time, I don't want to feel like I'm just overstepping my boundaries because, like I said, I'm not the writer. Yeah, I mean, I have mentioned that. And if there is a bigger problem, though, I would mention to, let's say, someone like my project manager, who I would mention, like, if there's a big problem that's overarching, then I could mention that to them. And hopefully things get resolved in the future if I happen to work with that same writer.
And it sounds like collaboration is a really important word. And at the same time, you're making it really clear, hey, I'm the quality control. I'm not the writer. In your role, you're respecting the writer's work. And yet there's also this give and take collaboration where the whole team is working together to deliver the best that they can. And what I'm hearing is that those specific notes that you're able to give on a specific show, for example, that those can sometimes influence things for the better.
They can. For me, where I'm coming from, I'm not the last stop on the AD train. Basically, it goes back to the writer, actually, so they can go through that pass again to go through the notes and see if they can correct or make any changes then. So, yeah, I mean, like you said, it is a bit of collaboration. That's just how it works for the company that I'm working for.
Do you find that you love audio description even more now? Do you relish it, or is it turning you off and you're like, I'm sick of this. This is work, and I gotta run away.
The thought that crossed my mind one time, I was like, man, I gotta clear my head. I'm gonna watch a movie, but then I realized, wait a second, you're gonna have to watch a movie with audio description if you're gonna. So I'm like, ah, crap. So, but no, I mean, it's I separate the two. One's work, one's definitely I'm putting in my hours, but the other one, if I'm just chilling and relaxing, then I just treat it differently. I kind of turn off that part in my mind, and I just sit down and relax and just watch a movie or a show.
Nice. Let's go back to your title as a content creator. How has working in quality control and audio description influenced your content?
Well, it's made me a little bit more self-conscious of what content I put out. I'm not saying I'm being extremely careful. It's more like if I do put out something creative, like if I make a short film, really, I would love to put audio description in something, but the thing is, I don't have the means to do that myself because, I mean, I could try to look at what I filmed, but, that's major eye strain right there. And would I be able to describe all the minor visual details? And that's one of the problems that I have being a blind content creator. I want to make this stuff accessible, but at the same time, I don't want to get called out for not making it accessible. So it's like I'm caught in this awkward scenario here. It's one of those things that has made me feel pretty self-conscious. I do caption my videos though, and especially my TikTok videos. I just burn in captions on top because it's like, hey, that's easy for me to do. That's just part of me wanting to make something accessible. I do provide the captions. You can access them as a file, I believe, on YouTube. That's another way I've made my content accessible. Still, though, it's hard to AD your own stuff when you're blind yourself. That kind of sucks.
There's two things also that we haven't talked about in this context. The first is that the work that you're doing as a quality control for AD, it has a budget. And whether it's the actual production having a budget or the AD facility that you're working for having a budget, both, that's a lot different than you being your own content creator. But what I'm hearing is in the work that you're doing as a content creator, for example, on YouTube, you mentioned that there are those things that are already built into the platform, YouTube specifically, as far as being able to download the captions, or like you mentioned on TikTok, being able to have the opt-in for burn-in for subtitles. That these things are things that are already part of the platform, which make your content, which I'm assuming, I'm not sure what your budget is, but I'm assuming it might be a little different than the budget on the AD projects that you've been working on, that you're bringing a conscientiousness to your content creator, that you are aware of your audience. And with the means that you have, you're doing the best you can to provide as much access as possible.
The thing is, I don't want to come off as a hypocrite by not adding captions, by not having audio description. But like I said, that's its own problem right there. But yes, I do try to be as accessible as possible. And it does make me feel like more self-conscious of like, what I'm putting out there. And yeah, I do know who most of my audience is. I appreciate any feedback, even though I really should do a better job at responding to comments because I tend to be late in doing that. So, but as for the captions in the TikTok videos, actually, what I do is I add them in during the editing. So I actually, yeah, I'm all fancy. I film myself separately. I don't film myself on the TikTok app or anything like that. I film myself, on my phone, then edit it in Final Cut Pro, and then I use this third-party software to do the captions like that. I export it and then I upload it. So I like to make things a lot harder for myself for some reason.
It's really clear that you deeply care not only about what you're sharing, but also who you're sharing it with. You mentioned the hypocrisy that you sometimes feel that I'm sure builds up. It's like you want to respect your audience, but it's not keeping you from sharing content. I'd imagine that there's this expectation of having perfectly accessible content for every single second and it's instantly available. That becomes really challenging, but you're still finding ways. And that each time that you release new content, you find a new way to do it that brings it more audience members that you had before. And that this is not oh, I finally reached accessibility boiling point. That as technology develops, as your audience grows, that you're going to learn more things and you're going to find those new things and you're going to apply them, that you're not stuck in your ways, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to be like that. Sometimes it is nice to be in a comfort zone, but at the same time, you do have to venture out a little bit because especially with something like YouTube and TikTok and Instagram Reels, it's a moving target. Trends are changing, people watch different things, and you can't be doing the same thing you were doing like 10 or so years ago because I mean, it is a moving target. You might be doing the same thing in general, but you might be delivering it in a slightly or very different way now.
This really ties back into quality control again for AD, that you can't be doing the same thing that you did 10 years ago in that moving target. There's got to be a temptation to stay in the comfort zone. And I'd imagine simply by you being hired to provide quality control, that that is going to support the AD facility to help them get outside of their own potential comfort zone. They're already doing great work. The very fact that they're hiring you shows that they're doing great work. The reason that they hire you, if I'm speculating, this could be a stretch here, but I'd imagine that the people you work for recognize that they're bringing their quality, their professionalism, their experience to you, and you're helping them. Hey, here's some new things that you might be able to try, that you're helping them get outside of their own comfort zone, that it's kind of a flip from your own content, getting out of your own comfort zone, and then also using your own experience to help your quality control AD facility get out of their comfort zone. Is that a fair connection?
You know what? I hadn't really thought about it until you mentioned that. So that's a good analogy, to be honest. And you bring up a few good points because that whole saying nothing about us without us. I mean, people say it all the time, but at the same time, with something like this, it's extremely necessary because we're the ones that are consuming this. It would be nice to have a hand in the creation of some of it because at the end of the day, we're the ones that are going to be watching this stuff and saying whether we like it or not. Also, because sometimes when we do have complaints or feedback, we might send emails or, contact the people who we think are the right parties. But at the same time, a lot of folks are just seen as consumers. But when you're someone who is blind themselves and is actually part of the QC process, not just part of the QC process, but as someone who is blind and who is actually taking part of the AD process, if someone like that brings up something like not to complain, but just, to make a point about like, hey, you know what, it might be good to maybe change this or suggest that. I think that opinion weighs a little bit more because now this is someone not just who's blind, but who's also, like I said, part of the creation process as well. And I think that hopefully those in charge are able to give a little more thought and provide better quality AD in the future.
Oh, that's great. And that goes back to your own skill set. Let's go back to what you said about nothing about us without us. That has launched a lot of blind professionals being involved in audio description in many roles, particularly in film and TV, not to mention so many others. One of my dreams is to make it nothing without us. That here's this microcosm, this very small, specific niche audio description, content that we're doing for film and TV. Nothing about us without us has really gained a lot of traction. That now we can leverage that and take that globally. In other words, nothing without us is the goal here. It doesn't just have to be about us to be without us. That nothing without us resonates with me in the sense that, hey, look, blind professionals bring so many skills to the table to get us out of our comfort zone, to help show different ways of approaching things and use the soft skills of finding new solutions and creatively approaching things in ways that maybe not have been done before. And that's not just limited to AD. I'd imagine that this nothing about us without us, I'm 100% behind. I'm looking forward to nothing without us and having more corporations outside of AD incorporating that when it comes to the accessibility and also hiring disabled professionals. Does this resonate with you at all? Am I going off on a, am I getting too idealistic here?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think that with AD, it can be something like a starting point, like a jumping off point into something bigger because, like you said, it can start with AD, but it can spread to other places. Even though people are talking about audio description and just accessibility in general, like in video games and, other places, it's still a very niche topic. And it's like, I would love to think that it's not, even though it's gaining popularity, it's still a niche topic. Because if it wasn't, people wouldn't be on social media asking, other blind people or even myself, like, oh, how do you use a phone if you're blind or stuff like that. Because I even got a comment recently when I did a video talking about a Mr. Beast video, and somebody posted in the comments saying like, wait, he's blind. How can they see his videos? So it really goes to show you that accessibility is still very much out on the fringes. So here's hoping that slowly but surely things do change over time because a lot of people's ignorance is really just because they just simply don't know.
And that kind of generous attitude of you seeing it as people just don't know. I mean, you and I worked together on the Audio Description Awareness Day for a handful of years. That was part of the the goal is to build awareness, to be able to showcase what audio description is, what excellent audio description is, and how things can go forward. And that Mr. Beast example, I think, is emblematic of the work that you've been putting out on YouTube and other places beyond TikTok. I guess with that in mind, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our AD audience here on this podcast that we haven't covered yet?
I would like to share one of the biggest frustrations that I do have with audio description at the moment because I recently experienced it, so it's still fresh in my mind. I know a lot of people have ran into this before. Basically, I was renting a film that I wanted to watch for a long time. I've seen it before. It's one of my favorite films, but it just recently got audio description. I ended up renting it on iTunes since I have an Apple TV, but only after I rented it did I realize that the Peacock version had AD, not the iTunes version. That's just one of the things that is extremely irritating in the audio description world because a lot of times tracks don't migrate to to other streaming services. The thing is, when it comes to being able to watch something, it might not even have an audio description track, or even worse, it might actually disappear after you've seen it and you swear that you saw it with AD, but now it's no longer there. That's my biggest gripe with audio description at the moment.
We've been talking about this lack of movement of audio description joining the production, that specifically in film and TV, that the cinema to streaming doesn't necessarily follow. What's really interesting about what you just said is that it's actually worse. You said it's worse when you knew it was there, maybe in the theater, in your case, downloading iTunes, and something happened. Knowing that it used to be there and not having it on the platform that's available for sighted people. It's really interesting that you said it's actually worse. Can you expand a little bit more about that?
There are instances where it does feel like it is a few steps backwards because in my case of renting that movie, like I said, what threw me off is it was it was labeled as having audio descriptions. But the thing is, because it was available on different platforms, it never specified as to which one. But because I was on Apple TV and I was using VoiceOver, I just assumed that, oh, okay, so it must have AD. But this was the first time I've ran into a situation where I've rented a movie and I've been surprised in all the wrong ways.
Yeah, that step backwards it does sound really disappointing to know it used to be there on something else. One of the things that seems to be happening in some productions, as production owns audio description instead of a distributor owning audio description, that it really allows that pass through, that it allows that audio description to be joined with production from the get-go, so that when it travels from cinema to streaming, it follows in a way that is not like the horror film called It Follows. Juan, how can we follow you on socials or websites?
I can be reached on my social media on, well, Twitter. Yes, I still call it Twitter. I'm not gonna call it X. I'm at Juan Juan underscore C as in Charlie underscore Alcazar Alcazar. I'm also found on Instagram and TikTok with the same username. And on YouTube, you can find me at youtube.com/Juan Alcazar. So just the same name, one word, Juan Alcazar.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.